Have you been feeling the effects of stress, burnout, or anxiety at work? Listen to the Anxious Achiever podcast to rethink the relationship between your career and your mental health. Get the Anxious Achiever wherever you find your podcasts and walk away with practical advice you can implement today.
LinkedIn presents.
The bits of advice and techniques that we learn from self-help books are often of limited value. What's good advice in one situation may become bad advice in another. Solutions that work well for some problems may backfire when applied to others. There's no guide to life that works for everyone in every situation. Wisdom consists in being able to think for yourself by adapting the rules that guide you creatively to fit new situations.
Hi everyone, it's Tuesday. This is the Next Big Idea Daily, and I'm your host, Michael Kovnat. Now, imagine you walk into your therapist's office. For the sake of this thought experiment, I'm going to imagine that you're in therapy, but if you're not, just play along. So you walk into a therapist's office, and there, waiting to help you work through your life problems, is a homely, stocky, balding man. Oh, and he's barefoot, wearing a toga, and speaking ancient Greek. That's right, your therapist is Socrates, one of history's most influential philosophers. The scenario may seem unlikely, but it turns out that the great Athenian thinker had a lot in common with a contemporary PhD psychologist. In fact, the Socratic method can be thought of as a form of cognitive behavioral therapy, according to Donald J. Robertson, author of the new book, How to Think Like Socrates, Ancient Philosophy as a Way of Life in the Modern World. Donald is a psychotherapist and writer working in Quebec, a founding member of the nonprofit organization Modern Stoicism, and the founder and president of the Plato's Academy Center nonprofit in Greece. He joins us now to share some of his big ideas.
Socrates, despite being one of the most influential philosophers in history, wrote nothing. At least that's what people like to say. However, Plato, his most famous student, tells us that while in prison, awaiting his execution, Socrates wrote poetry. More intriguingly, Epictetus, the famous Stoic philosopher who lived 4 centuries later, claimed that Socrates jotted down countless notes designed for his own self-improvement, but never intended for publication. We can only imagine what such notes may have looked like, although perhaps we have a clue. Another of his students describes how Socrates taught a young man to practice philosophy by means of a formal, written exercise. Socrates drew 2 columns. The first headed justice and the second injustice. His companion was invited to list examples of wrongdoing to be placed under the heading of injustice, such as theft and deceit. It's often easier to understand our values if we begin by defining their opposites. However, the basic skill underlying the Socratic method really comes into play in the next step. Socrates asked his friend if he could imagine any situations where the things he'd listed under injustice might be placed under the heading of justice. For instance, a general who seized the weapons of the enemy during a war might be said to be stealing, but perhaps that's not unjust. Likewise, a father might be considered to be justified in concealing medicine in the food of a small child to trick him into taking it, although this is a form of deceit. Socrates was very skilled at coming up with these sorts of examples. He practiced doing similar things every day of his life, we're told, in philosophical conversations with his friends. Training yourself to think of exceptions to rules and definitions can help you to avoid applying them too rigidly. I believe that this skill is important for several reasons. One is that the bits of advice and techniques that we learn from self-help books are often of limited value. What's good advice in one situation may become bad advice in another. Solutions that work well for some problems may backfire when applied to others. There's no guide to life that works for everyone in every situation. Wisdom consists in being able to think for yourself by adapting the rules that guide you creatively to fit new situations. Socrates' two-column technique only teaches one small part of his famous philosophical method, but it's a great way to start developing the cognitive skills necessary to think more flexibly and adaptively about life. Learn to generate alternative perspectives. Epictetus said that people are distressed not by events, but by their opinions about events. You may have heard this. It was one of the main inspirations behind cognitive therapy, the leading form of modern evidence-based psychotherapy. However, the idea goes back to Socrates, a century before the Stoic school of philosophy was founded. Modern psychological research has confirmed that our beliefs shape our emotions to a greater extent than we normally assume. By changing the way we think, we can change the way we feel. An obstacle stands in the way. Some of our beliefs are so entrenched that we find it difficult to imagine ever viewing events differently. When we're gripped by strong emotions, such as fear or anger, it may just feel natural to view certain events as catastrophic or certain people as unbearable. Socrates, at times, behaved rather like a modern-day cognitive therapist. He would ask his friends, for example, whether they imagined that the events that upset them might be viewed differently by other people. What you see as a catastrophe, someone else might view as bad but not catastrophic. Another person might see it as bad but only temporary, whereas a third might even look on it as an opportunity. By simply becoming aware that multiple alternative perspectives are conceivable, you can help yourself to become more attuned to the way your beliefs are influencing your emotions. Separate your thoughts from external events. Cognitive therapists say our beliefs are like coloured lenses through which we look at the world. Suppose you're wearing blue lenses, which colour the world with sadness. There's a difference between looking at the world through your sad blue lenses and looking at them. This shift in perspective can be compared to stepping to one side and observing your own biases as if you were observing someone else's. When we're able to distinguish between our thoughts and external reality in this way, it can have two main benefits. The most obvious is that our emotions tend to be reduced in intensity. The second is more subtle, but arguably even more valuable. We become better at exploring alternative ways of looking at our problems. When we gain flexibility in this way, we become better at finding creative solutions, which often improve how things work out for us in the long term. Therapists today have fancy names for this, like cognitive distancing or diffusion, but it basically means learning to separate beliefs from the things to which they refer. It allows you to view your own thinking with greater objectivity and has been found especially helpful for emotional problems such as anxiety and depression. You can do this in a number of ways. The simplest is just to write your thoughts down and take time observing them from a detached perspective. Another is to tell yourself, I notice right now that I am having the thought, and then state the thought you were having as if you were putting it in quotation marks. You can also just imagine that some thought or belief has been painted in big letters on a wall, and picture the colour and shape of the letters, perhaps changing the appearance, until you have a sense of the words being like objects, over there, rather than inside your head. Therapists may also ask their clients to repeat a troubling thought aloud very rapidly for about 30 seconds, or to say it more slowly with longer pauses. It's interesting to try worrying in slow motion. These techniques allow us to experience a thought or belief with greater detachment, looking at our mental lenses for a while rather than looking through them. You're not avoiding the thought, it's still there. You're just experiencing it from another perspective. And you can still talk about the evidence for and against it, or the pros and cons of believing it, and so on. I believe that Socrates gained this sort of detachment from his own beliefs by discussing them with his friends. He compared self-knowledge to an eye that sees itself. And the best way to achieve this, he thought, was by engaging in philosophical conversations where you can view the other person as a mirror for the mind, in which you may contemplate your own thinking more objectively. We're told that when Socrates had finished discussing philosophy with his friends, he would go home and continue the conversation with himself in private. He would imagine another Socrates interrogating him about his assumptions concerning wisdom, justice, and the other virtues. Socrates appears to have been known for referring to himself as if he was another person. A similar technique, which involves talking about yourself using your name or third-person pronouns such as he or she, is called Iliism. It is occasionally used in modern psychotherapy to help clients manage anxiety and other distressing emotions. The psychologist Igor Grossman heads a centre carrying out research on the nature of wisdom at the University of Waterloo in Canada. He was intrigued by a paradox. We often seem better at giving other people advice than solving our own problems. He and his colleagues carried out a variety of experiments and found, for example, that when people write about their problems in a journal using the third person, they exhibit more wisdom than when writing in the first person. He calls this method distanced reflection, and you can use it to help improve your ability to reason, especially about problems that normally evoke strong feelings. Anger and perceived injustice. Philosophers have debated the nature of justice for thousands of years, but we don't normally think doing so is therapeutic. However, studies have found that individuals who suffer from clinical depression often perceive themselves as victims of injustice. Ancient Greek philosophers understood that anger is often associated with a desire for those we perceive as having acted unjustly to be punished. Cognitive psychologists have arrived at a similar conclusion. Anger often involves blaming others for having violated some rule. One of the most striking things about Socrates was that he insisted that the injustice of others could not harm him. He was not angry with the men responsible for his unjust trial and execution. Indeed, paradoxically, he believed that injustice does more harm to the perpetrator than to the victim. Few people today would accept such a radical position, but we can imagine how it may have helped Socrates to show extraordinary fortitude and resilience in the face of persecution. What I've found helps many people is to get into the habit of asking themselves a very simple question. What does you more harm, your anger or the things you're angry about? Although there are real injustices in the world, anger is seldom the most helpful response. In trivial cases, it may be best simply to let go of our sense of injustice so that we can move on. Whereas facing more serious problems may be easier if we replace our anger with assertiveness. At times it can be difficult to decide whether or not our feelings are justified, but it's important to spot when anger is doing us more harm than the wrongdoing we're concerned about.
Thank you, Donald. All right, listeners, go get yourself a copy of Think Like Socrates at your favorite bookstore. And to find more great ideas, go to nextbigideaclub.com to see everything we have to offer. And right now, you can get 50% off an Express membership. That's nextbigideaclub.com and use the code DAILY50 to get that discount. I'm Michael Kovnat. See you tomorrow.